Hi, it's Noreen Vanderhoeven. I am so glad that you're here to join me today. And we are going to talk about more on suicide risk assessment and trying to spot the high-risk client that may not be on your radar. So if you have any questions, there is the question box on the side. Definitely ask that, or below it says ask a question. Go for that one. And while the webinar is running, I probably will not be able to see your questions. So I will answer them after the webinar is over, but please, please, please put them all in there and let's get going. Gotta share my screen here and we'll be set. All right. So here we go. So in today's webinar, you are going to learn challenges that all therapists, new or experienced, may be encountering when working with high-risk clients, why you can never know enough to protect yourself and your clients, and why some clients are at higher risk, what clients might not say if you do not ask, and what clients might not say if you don't know how to ask. So those two last things are key. Some people either don't know what to ask, or they are afraid to ask, or they're not asking it using the language that the client is going to understand. As far as protecting yourself, that is just being able to document and to be able to ask the right questions and make sure that you are keeping your client as safe as you can. So let's see. The other thing is, we will talk a little bit at the end about why no one is immune from compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma, that in the helping field in general, whether that be teachers, nurses, therapists, doctors, anyone in the helping field, everybody will experience compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma at some point if you are dealing with these high-risk clients. And we will talk about the differences in compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, and burnout. And then in future webinar next week, we will talk about some of the things as to how to combat that. So first thing we talked about last week, and I just want to repeat, suicide does not happen without warning. I would say, I think the statistic is 3 out of 4 people who die by suicide have put out some signs. Not everybody sees them. Some of them are very, very subtle. So we will start talking about today what some of those signs are. So here's some more statistics. Previous suicide attempts serve as a risk factor for completed suicide, and suicide risk is 30%, let me try again, 37% higher in the first year after deliberate self-harm than in the general population. And that is the same. There's another statistic that I didn't write in here, but dying by suicide is higher risk after discharge from the hospital, whether it be psychiatric hospital or medical hospital. Those with substance use disorders are 6 times more likely to complete suicide than those without. And men with drug and alcohol problems, 2 to 3 times higher than those. And you'll see women are even higher, 6 to 9 times % higher. And the other, or 6 times higher risk, sorry. The other thing is that about 54% of the people who die by suicide do not have a mental health disorder. That was a statistic from NAMI, and that is a myth that people think that most people with mental health issues die by suicide. Definitely not true. Okay, here is another statistic. So 40% of the people who die by suicide have made a previous attempt. And although people may not call suicide prevention centers, 64 of the people who attempt suicide visit a doctor within the month before their attempt. And it could be any kind of doctor. And it also could be maybe they've seen a therapist, but they've just seen a therapist once. Could be they've seen, I don't know, a dermatologist or whatever, but they are reaching out for help in any way they know how. And when people are suicidal, truly, truly suicidal, they have tunnel vision, and they really have a difficult time seeing outside of that tunnel. And so their way of reaching out might not be what we think is a rational or typical way of reaching out. They're going to reach out to whoever they see might be available to them. And 38% see someone in the week before. So here's the differences between risk factors and warning signs, two different things. So warning signs are that immediate risk. It's people engaging in risky behaviors. So maybe someone is saying they're not paying attention and they walk in front of a car, whereas they are actually walking in front of a car because that's one of the ways that they're saying, well, I don't really care if I die or not. They're not saying that they're making a suicide attempt, but that is definitely an immediate risk. Obviously, directly saying they plan on killing themselves, immediate risk. A lot of parents, unfortunately, don't take their teens seriously when they do say that. They feel that I think I talked about this a little last time, they're being manipulative, or that they're wanting attention. Well, maybe they are wanting attention, and that's the only way they know how to get it. I actually just had a client in my office the other day say that she tried to kill herself 5 times, and she really didn't want to die, but that was the only way she can get her mom's attention. So we will talk about that a little later again. Another thing is giving things of importance away, writing text messages. All of these things are immediate risks of suicide. This is the risk factors. So heightened risk is nothing to do with immediate risk. History of suicide attempts, mental health diagnoses, although we did talk about just now that only 54% that die by suicide have mental health diagnosis, demographics, prior hospitalizations. Possession of firearms is the #1 warning sign and risk factor. So those are 2 different things that you're looking at, and you need to look at both of those things to see if your client is at risk and if they do have risk factors. So someone might be coming into your office maybe with heightened anxiety, and they have no thoughts of suicide at the time, but let's say they do have a history of attempts. They do have maybe one of their family members died by suicide, or someone close to them died by suicide. Maybe they have been in therapy before with other therapists, and prior hospitalizations. All of these things are risk factors, but it's not saying that they're going to die by suicide or that they're going to attempt suicide even at any point in the future. But it's definitely something you have to always keep in the back of your head. Okay. So, whoops, let's go back for a second. There we go. Okay, so has this ever happened to you? You have a client come into your office and you're trying to think what to say. The client is saying nothing. You're asking the client, how are you doing today? The client's like, meh, and he's shrugging his shoulders. He's taken a long time to answer your questions. He just doesn't know. Then you try another one. What do you think is giving you such a hard time right now? Well, client's like, I don't know. Another closed door. Okay, another question. Do you want to talk about it? Not really. I don't know. These are all the questions that you might get. And then what do? You're just kind of stuck. So really, it depends upon the client. in any type of situation, obviously, but if you know that this client is having some suicidal thoughts, or if you think that this client has been depressed, or obviously you could see in this incident, the client looked pretty depressed. These are some of the things you do. One of the things that you can try and do is an alternate style of interaction. Maybe have them do, a short journal prompt in your office. I also have a bunch of different cards that have different prompts on them. I have, one of them is called Teen Talk, but I use them for adults all the time, and they have also different things to, ask about. Drawing also helps. Ask them sometimes if they cannot verbalize something, but they are able to draw it. Same thing, sand tray. If you don't have a sand tray, even those little, like I have one of those little, I don't know, 8x10 Zen sand tray things that I have clients use all the time. And once they start using it, it just seems to warm them up and they're able to talk a little more. If you do have a sand tray and you use sand tray therapy, that is awesome. And a lot of times that is very helpful in getting clients to talk, especially when they're so depressed. Sometimes they can play out a scene in the sand, but they can't really talk about it. So part of what I've had in the trainings that I've done is a lot of times in these situations with suicidal clients, therapists don't know what to say. And so they say stuff that ends up being counterproductive. And that just shuts the client down. So what is it you do say? Maybe it's, I appreciate you trusted me. I can only imagine how scared you feel. I'm so sorry you've had to suffer. Please know there's help. But the thing that's not helpful is at no point don't offer solutions, the whole I know how you feel, because even if you do know how they feel, you're not going to be disclosing that to your client right at that moment. I understand what you're going through, same thing. You should think of the positive, you have so much to live for. Maybe they really don't have so much to live for. I had a client that I saw for about 1.5 years that was suicidal regularly, and she really didn't have a lot to live for. Middle-aged woman, and she just had a pet, and that was it. She really did not have friends in her life. She had no connection. She had no family, and so it was a true struggle for her, and it was on a weekly basis. I actually saw her twice a week. That it was a struggle. She finally ended up ending therapy with me because she was mad that the crisis team came and hospitalized her. Even though it wasn't me, she saw it as a result of me. And I hope that she did get help and that she's doing okay at this point. But I know that I did all I can do. So language. This is just a part of language that we're going to talk about. We'll talk about kind of more in-depth language at another time, but you need to ask specifically about suicidal ideations in the recent and remote past. So it's not just asking, are you suicidal now, or are you experiencing suicidal thoughts right now? Because maybe they're not, but they are at high risk if, let's say, you ask them, have you experienced any suicidal thoughts in the last couple of weeks or within the last 6 months? And then that would go on, to ask them about triggering events and what was it that triggered those suicidal thoughts. That will give you an idea of where it is that you can go with your client and what it is that you need to focus on with them. So make sure that you are really touching on that. Also, another crucial thing. So ask specifically about how long their suicidal thoughts last each time, because if they're telling you, well, they just come and go and they're able to find, coping skills to deal with them, awesome. Then focus on those coping skills. But if they're telling you that their suicidal thoughts last for 2 hours, 3 hours, 6 hours, then it's about how do they get through it and what is it that they need help with to be able to get through that right now. On an average, suicidal thoughts last from 10 minutes to 2.5 hours. If they can get over that hump of that period of time, then a lot of times they're able to get past their suicidal thoughts. But while they are experiencing their suicidal thoughts, it's hard for them to see that. So it's really coming up with a lot of good strategies to help them. And you're not going to know about this unless you ask about this, because most of the time they will not just volunteer that. So there are different things. Screening versus assessment are two different things. And I think a lot of people end up doing screening, suicide, like risk screenings, but they don't actually then do a full assessment. So screening tools, which could be just one question, right? Like I had just mentioned about the recent and remote. So have you had thoughts of killing yourself in the last 2 weeks? That's a screening. It could be a series of questions, as in the ASQ, which is a screening tool. We'll get to that in a minute because I have a couple of samples from that ASQ. Assessment tools. Once you have determined there is a risk of suicide, you need to determine how detailed. Is it a low risk, medium, high risk? What do you do now? How much more do you need to, what other steps do you need to take? Are they safe to go home? Do you do a safety plan? Do you need to have them assessed to be hospitalized? Do they need to go to the emergency room? What is it exactly that you need to do next? So this in particular is taken from the Columbia Suicide Rating Scale. These are screening questions for very young children, as it says on their rating scale. Now, I don't know how many people who have ever worked with young children, have young kids, have had young kids, engaged with young kids. But when you ask a young kid, did you ever do anything to try to kill yourself or make yourself not alive anymore? They might just say no, because they don't think that they did. They might not understand what kill yourself means, and they might not understand what make yourself not alive anymore means. The same thing, did you hurt yourself on purpose? And why did you do that? Well, a lot of times they're gonna go, I don't know. Even if they say, yes, I did, they might say, I don't know. Did you think it was possible you could have died from whatever it was that they did? Again, they might not understand the concept of died. So here is the ASQ that I talked about. And the same types of questions. These are just all screening questions, but the key is if they answered yes to any of the above, then you go on to the ask the bottom one. But a lot of times people aren't going to tell you that maybe they haven't ever tried to kill themselves. Okay, so that's number one, so that rules that out possibly. The other ones are if they've been having thoughts about them killing themselves, or where it says, in the past few weeks, have you felt that you or your family would be better off if you were dead? Well, maybe they haven't felt that, but maybe they felt like they don't want to be here. They want to disappear. They're, tired of life. They feel like no one's there for them. So these don't necessarily really screen out everybody. You might have to ask the question in 5 different ways if you feel like your client is going, nope, I don't feel like I wish I were dead. Well, maybe it's that they wanted to go to sleep and never wake up again. So just the verbiage changing could be the difference of getting a yes or no answer. So here's another one. How hopeless did you feel at that point as compared to were you hopeless? The same technical question, but it's asking 2 different things. And were you hopeless is a yes or no closed answered question. How hopeless did you feel at that point is actually an open-ended question. So they have to answer something. They could see, no, I didn't feel hopeless at all. Or they can tell you, maybe that'll be that kind of opening door to tell you that. And kind of what we talked about before. So young kids don't necessarily have a true concept of what it is to die. The risk is they want their pain to end. They might use before, like I said, they wish they could disappear. Maybe they were invisible. Maybe they can hide forever. Maybe they want to go to sleep forever. Even at that, sometimes they don't understand. So a lot of times I'll ask them something like that, like, did you want to go to sleep forever and never wake up? And sometimes I'll say yes. And I'll say, well, do you understand that means you will never see your mommy or your daddy or your friends or your dog? And a lot of times it's that animal that's that key to kind of getting them hooked in, because maybe they are mad at their mom or their dad, and they're feeling like they're ignored or neglected or whatever the case is that's making them so sad. But the minute you bring in their dog, that's when they'll go, oh, no, I don't want to do that. Or if they do say yes, then you need to kind of explore this further, because that really is a big concern then. So the three critical pieces about suicide assessment that you have to know, especially really with any client, is the minute your client walks in the door, whether or not they're expressing suicidal ideation, you have to be asking about suicidal ideation. So in my initial assessments, I always ask about their level of depression, about their history, about their thoughts of suicide. It's a very detailed assessment to be able to find out if they actually do have any thoughts of suicide, or if they have had an attempt. If you're not asking that, it's a huge piece you're missing out on. The other thing is, in your assessment, that very initial assessment, the big key is asking about all of their history, because maybe they don't have any thoughts of suicide or haven't. But again, as we talked about earlier, when you have a family member, or if you have someone that that died by suicide, or a family that has a history of mental health issues, that could be contributing to, future risk, if not current risk. That doesn't mean that it is an immediate risk. So it's really about having a conversation. It's more than just the numbers, or as you saw before, that yes or no on a page, because yes or no is closed-ended. Your answers aren't always going to be yes or no. They may be something else. So safety planning is something you do with all clients. Even if your clients are coming in just as depressed or anxious, I do a safety plan that has to do with their depression and anxiety, even if they've never had any suicide risk at all. So we will talk about, I will show you a template of my safety plan. I think the next slide. Other risk factors, and we've kind of been talking about this all along: family, previous history, substance abuse, as you saw in the numbers earlier, that attributes to an increase in death by suicide, and any environmental factors. It could be that someone, has had this high-powered job and then they lost their job and they're unemployed. It could be that they are going through a divorce. It could be that someone in their family just died. So there are so many things. It could be that there's a kid or a teen that moved from one state to another and now has no friends and can't make friends. So these are all huge factors. Okay, here's the suicide rating scale that I use. So what I do is, it's originally a blank scale. Sometimes I'll put anxiety rating scale or depression rating scale, whatever it is. And I go from 1 to 5. I always ask 1 to 5 because 1 to 10 is just way too broad. 1 to 5 really zeroes in and gives you a target of what it is. I also always ask them, what exactly is a 1? What is a 2? What is a 3? Etc. 1 through 5. And then I also ask them, what is their baseline? Because I had a client who had a baseline of a 2 every single week, that she always had some low-level thoughts of suicide. And it was really more of she just didn't want to live and didn't want to be here and be, you know, really, like she would say, on this planet. But she didn't have any thoughts of following through, no plan, no means, no anything. And if you remember last week, we talked about Thomas Joiner's theory of you need to have the 3 different pieces of burdensome and feeling that you're isolated, and then also the capability to have that perfect storm of falling into that category of yes, that you do have something and you're going to follow through. Also, in parentheses, the I don't want to be here right now and I just want to disappear. Those are statements that either kids or teens might make, although adults make them too. But when they do make those, I always ask them really to like operationalize them more. So what exactly does that mean? And how am I going to know what you're talking about when you're just saying, I want to disappear, and, you know, like what steps do we need to take? So I will have a blank copy of this that I am going to put a link on my website, and you can access it there. It'll probably be up within the next 24 hours. At the end of this, my website is going to be listed. So I would say by tomorrow, you can go on to the website, and under resources, I will have a specific tab that says rating scale, and you can grab that there. Okay, so here is another truth or rumor. We're going to move into compassion fatigue because we're running low on time here, so it's perfect timing. Oops, that didn't go. There we go. Okay, so truth or rumor. Seasoned clinicians are at greater risk for compassion fatigue than newer clinicians. And the answer is a rumor. Really, the newer clinicians are more at risk because they're the ones that they don't know what to expect sometimes. And they're just more vulnerable to being overwhelmed. This is the book that I had got that information from. And they're new to this whole process. So they definitely will experience compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma quicker. Burnout. Burnout is different than compassion fatigue or vicarious trauma. It is not trauma related. It just has to do with you are overworked, you are emotionally exhausted, and you are, you know, it's like it says, the perceived demands are outweighing perceived resources. So nothing to do with trauma. Okay, compassion fatigue. This is just where you begin to feel so tired, both physically and emotionally, or physically or emotionally, because you are providing such compassion for your client that you then leave the session or leave the office for the day and you feel like you don't have an ounce of energy left in you. You can't feel like you can't talk to anybody. You don't want to do anything. You just need to kind of cut yourself off right then and there from social media, engaging in conversations, whatever. I'm sure that most people have experienced it, if not all people. And we can do something about compassion fatigue by self-care. So the last one is vicarious trauma. And that's when it is that cumulative effect where you are starting to experience the trauma that your client is talking about. And it's not like you experience the trauma yourself, but after hearing it so much, sometimes it actually starts to sit within your nervous system and you become hypervigilant, or you start to have flashbacks of what your client's talking about. And it's also called secondary traumatic stress. So you might hear either one of those terms. Now, there's also a difference, okay? There's the vicarious trauma, right? And then there is countertransference, which is your own reaction to a client that, you know, there have your own roots come up with what they're talking about, your own traumas. Then there's also counter-reaction, which is you might not have any trauma or any experience of what they're talking about, but it's just that natural reaction, which kind of goes back to the vicarious trauma of, you know, being overwhelmed by their trauma or having those flashbacks or, you know, the anxiety or whatever it is in relation to your client's trauma. So next time, we will talk about learn from a suicidologist why your evidence-based assessments are not enough. And we've kind of touched on that a little bit. There's a lot of terminology that people use that we are trying to change in the world of suicidology. And yes, that is a term. And why it's important to know all these skills, because that is going to help keep your client safe and alive. And only an evidence-based assessment may not be enough to get accurate information. We are also going to talk about some of the things that we, more language issues we talked about today, and whatever other questions you guys have. So that is that for today. Thank you guys for coming. Let me see if there are any questions. And if not, then you can always put them in after. I do not have any questions today. So definitely feel free to go to either one of my websites. By tomorrow, the rating scale will be up. If you have any questions, you can email me from my website. Feel free to do that there. And I hope to see you guys next week. All right, have a good one. Bye-bye.